Yeah. So today we are going to see HQLs today. Now HQL is nothing but Hibernate query language. So if you have any IT experience, right? You know SQLs and how to design PLSQL queries and how to design, MS SQL queries, which is SQL queries and all, right? So there in our database situation, right? So we'll be taking care of queries based on the table existence and the columns, column existence in that table, right? So out of the columns and tables, right? So we write so many things like functions, indices, store procedures, and everything, right? Now here in our Hibernate, right, we have an option to write even the query. So you can get all the details, you can update as we have already seen, like create and update all that, right? So if you want to do anything using queries, so even HQLs you'll be using, most of the times you'll be using HQLs also. So I'll show you all possible HQLs, how we can actually write different things in here. So one main difference between our SQLs and HQL is in SQL, as I said, we'll be using table and columns for actually, designing query. And it can be a simple query, it can be aggregate query, or it can be a compound query, or anything. Right? We mainly focus on tables and columns. But in HQLs, which is Hibernate query language, queries, right? We never actually go directly into tables and columns. Why? Because we are designing some model classes which indirectly or directly map a table, right? And the column names are nothing but parameters in our model classes. So we are going to write queries, Hibernate queries based on model classes, which is, I can say, model class or basically entity class, right? As now this will be the class name, basically will be the table name as such, and the columns are nothing but parameters. Remaining format of writing SQLs like start from, or the pattern will be same, but the only thing is we mainly concentrate on the entity class name, which will be the mapping table name, and the parameter will be the actual mapping columns which we are going to see. The column names and parameters name may be different, because we have already seen that whenever we design a parameter, right, it can be same as column name or not. If you exclusively mention at the rate column entity, right, which is let's say, mm, let's say we have defined something called private, some string, we have defined some user name, right, name, which was student name. But on top of this we actually define something called column with name as something like student underscore name, let's say, right? Now here the parameter is name, but the actual mapping column is student name. Now here itself you can see the difference, right? But it doesn't matter. We should, for this parameters, we are not going to use any of the annotation mapping name. No, we are going to use only the actual parameter names which we have, right? First thing. Second thing is that, let's say this is under some class called public class students, right? We have defined students class, right? So and so. Let's say this is a class, and this is our entity, which is we have defined something called entity, right? And we have defined something called table, whose name we gave as, let's say, students underscore something records, something or details. This is the table name, which means the mapping table name is this, but the actual class name is this. So for our HQLs, we are not going to use the entity or any other mapping name. We are going to use the true class name, right? So internally, whenever we use a true class name for queries, it is going to map. Hibernate APIs will take care of mapping students with the corresponding student details here, because of we are actually mapping this model class in our configuration, Hibernate configuration, with the complete package. That will actually make Hibernate to understand, okay, whenever we call students, which means this is the entity class name whose mapping table is this. And inside students, if you are actually accessing any parameter, which means you are actually using um, the column called student name. Now here, if you have some getter setter for this, right? Don't worry about this because we are not going to use, directly while writing query, you have to use a direct parameter name, not like get name or set name. No, that is used internally to set the value or get the value. As simple as that, right? So these are different things which we are going to use for our HQLs, which is Hibernate query language. Now, that is the reason why I said you can compare SQLs and HQLs, but you have to make sure that sometimes there will be trimmed syntax in HQLs. Let me give you one example here. So I've just written all possible queries which we can get. So first let me explain initial one. Now everything will be same, guys. So you have to create a session. You have to create a session factory first, because we have to open up our connection to the database, right? So until unless you have a connection to database, obviously you can't fetch the data, right? First thing is that once you get session, we just say open session, which means it will actually connect to database, and then it will return the actual active connection status, which is session. So through this session only we are going to write so many things. The first thing is that this will be standard again, which is begin transaction. So until unless you say begin transaction, this is like, you are actually creating a direct command in your session. Now, so let's get into the details here. First thing is that, so query is something which is a Hibernate class here, r.hibernate.query. Now this query is something which is pre-built query, which is also called as a pre-compiled one, right? So how do we write a query? Is a simple query. Now this HQL is same as, let me write something called select star from students underscore some details, let's say. So this is the actual SQL with respect to this table, let's say, right? We have a students table, right? Now actual name is students underscore details, let's say, right? And the class name here is, this is the students. Okay, we have taken students data, right? So let me just take students data here. Now this is a SQL which we write normally for a table named students underscore data, right? But when we come back to SQL, see what to do. Now we always write a query using something called session.create query. This is a catch here. So we always, until unless the session is open, we can't create a query first, right? This is important. Now this create query will get the query, I'll come to this query part. So this will actually fetch the query which we have written. It will compile the query, right, and build the, and execute the query, and will actually give the complete command prompt to this query object, which is nothing but a query. Now that is what this query internal method will do. Now internally you can see that, as I said, we are going to take up only model class names. Now you can see I've taken from student's name, which means once you give from student's name, which means we are actually trying to fetch all the records from students table, which is students data table. We just gave class name called students because my model data is nothing but students here. That is what I've taken, students from students, right? So this will actually give me the complete query called select star from so and so, which you have to give just a from students. Now if you want to fetch all the details, then you'll go for this. Now let's say you want to fetch only one, let's say some name here, then you can just say name from, as simple as that. We'll come to this later, right? We can also say select some name from here. We'll come to this later. Now if you want to fetch the very basic query, if you want to fetch everything, then we'll be writing this part. Now this will give us a query object, which is this. Now if you're trying to fetch the data, now you don't have to run this query, or you don't have to actually do execution separately. Now once you get this query, right, now don't worry about this, I'll explain you this later. So this query will give the list of objects, right? Now this query will give list of objects in a sense, as we already have the students, right, mapped to this table, right? Whenever you say I want to get all the details, let's say you have actually inserted some 10 records, which means it will give 10 different student objects. Now that is why how to take them is I'm actually creating a list called details, and I'm actually saying query dot list. Now this will give me the list of some class. Now either you can give list, or you can actually give the generic type called students, because it is going to give a students objects. Now you just have to typecast it to, so let me typecast it to list of students, simple, right? So this will give me the students list. Now once you get it, now you can actually work on this. Either you want to get size, you can get it, or let's say you want to iterate through each and every record, you can write for each again, right? For each student here, let's say item in details. Now this detail is nothing but each and every detail you have. Now here it is very important that once you are mapping the students, which means you are trying to get everything, which is select star and not the only one data, then you can actually map the complete details. Fine. Now here you can get like item dot, you have something called get. Now you can see everything you can access. Let's say get name, right? We have something called item dot some get user ID, let's say. Now in this way you can get everything for all the records. Now this is how we normally write a query. This is how it gets executed, and if you are fetching all the details, it will be in query, and when you say list, it will actually create a, where is that list? Yeah, this list. It will actually create the object, and that object we are actually trying to typecast so that we can get the list object whose internal classes are student classes, right? So this is how we normally write a query and handle that. So as I said, so from students, so this is common. Now let's say you want to get all the details, right? But you want to get students of student record of certain students. Now you can see I've written one more query here. Let me just write it here itself. I can just say where. You can have the same SQL query. Now here, now let's say I want to use my user ID column. You can see here, as I said, the user ID is something. Now if you go down, you can see user ID I actually gave student ID, which means what we are trying to do here is I'm trying to do this. So select start from, I'm just writing a SQL query. I'll just say where student ID is equal to 101, let's say. This is a query which I am planning to write. But here when you say where, right, you should not take the column name, right? So you should take the mapping parameter here. Now the mapping parameter is nothing but a user ID. Just take that user ID and just say user ID, just say is equal to 101. Either you can use is equal to, let's say you want to get details of students whose user ID is greater than 101 or less than 101, right? You can take anything you want. All the where conditions will actually suffice. And if you want to go ahead for more, you can use and let's say you want to get name whose name is so and so, let's say some example. Now this matching criteria, so we will get the object of students, list of students when these conditions are satisfied only. And if don't, which means if you don't have any list here, which means you'll get a null, then you can check that okay, there are no records or so and so. This is how you can actually write a query. Only thing is you always should use either you should use a class name, which is model entity class name for the table name mapping, and the parameter for the column mapping. Okay, and you'll get the list items here. Now let's say you want a particular column here. Now let's say I want only select some marks here. We haven't created, that's fine. You can create a marks here, that's fine, right? Now let's say I want the marks column only here. Now you can see that this will not work, right? I'm actually trying to get only one column here, which is, let's say, string column. Then if you know that whatever you're writing, you know that okay, you are going to get so and so, then so this will actually return that part. So you have to make sure that you are making it as a string, so that whatever details you are going to fetch are the marks. So you can actually go ahead with, let's say, string here, right? Now for each string it will give an item, right? Now this item is direct marks use. So you can just go and say, so marks are so and so, just say that item. Now this is how you can get each column right with this. Now here again catch is something that you are actually using entity class name and all the parameters. Even this marks is nothing but a marks, one of the marks here. So let me just, to avoid the confusion, let me create marks also here, and for this marks we are going to create corresponding getter setters here. Source getter setter, select this marks and click on OK. Right now this will give you the actual parameter, and if you know that you want to map it to the something, some other column name, just go ahead with the column here and just say name attribute as, let's say, student underscore marks. Let's say I'm just giving the total marks. Just think about any situation, but take it as an example. Okay. Now here you can see I'm using marks, but actual mapping column is student marks. Now which means I'm actually writing a query for this. Select student marks from student data where so and so ID is equal to so and so ID. Right. So this is how we write a SQL query, HQL query, and get the details and iterate through them so that we can actually get the actual details you want. Right. Now, how can we? This is the first query, and this is something where we are writing some compound using a where condition. Now you can see here this user ID and so and so name are hard coded, but we are not interested much on hard code. We always need a dynamic one, right? So we want to get something, but where condition, whenever we go for where conditions, right, we may need to assign some dynamic user ID name, right? Now let's see how to do that. Now I've taken one more situation here where I'm writing this one more query where you can actually write the yep, this is the one. Now here you can see that. Now let's say I want to update, or you can also make it for select. Let me make it for select itself. So let me just copy this here. Let's say from, okay, from, I'm just taking as where, okay, name is equal to so and so. Now here we are actually taking, this is called as named parameters. Okay, name parameters in the sense you are actually taking a direct name. You can just say for name, let's say I'm giving it as small n, and user ID I just gave it as I. Right? So these are first way how you can actually mention the dynamic where condition. Name is equal to, you have to give colon and n, and after that, now you can see here we have to create a query using create query, which will give us a query session. Now here you can actually mention this as a query dot set parameter. Now here you have to give what is a parameter. There are two things. First thing is either you can give position param, or second thing is named param. Now here the first case what we are seeing is named parameter. Now here my name first named is n and the argument. So what is the name? Let's say I want to give some Kiran, some name here, set parameter, which means this will actually replace my n variable, which is n parameter, with Kiran. And the next one, which is query dot set parameter of let's say here the next one is I, take an I, and then just say which is user ID, let's say 101. This will actually set this. Now these will be substituted here, right? And with respect to either you are selecting or doing something, right, it will actually get the details. Now this is the first way to do a substitute of or making a dynamic query. Now the second way is that, now let me just use the session query, LWG query here is equal to LWG session dot, we have to create a query. Now here you have something called, let's say I'm taking again from students. Now again here you have to use only either parameter names or the class name. Okay, so make sure that it is case sensitive. Let's say students where let's say name is equal to, you can have a optional parameter, right? Sorry, it should be and here, I just forgot, right? And you can have user id is equal to question mark. Now in this way you can give, so these are called as optional parameters, right? Now here optional parameters, how can we set these as a dynamic? Again I'll be using the set parameter from query, now which is query dot, I'll be using the same thing, but here I have to mention the parameter index. Now when I take 1, which means I'm going to take the substitute the first parameter here, right, which is let's say name is some string, and let's say I'm actually trying to get, no sorry, it starts with 0. Zeroth index parameter is the first one, and then it continues. If you have 4 different optional parameters, then you'll have to give each and every parameter for that. Now let's say second one is user ID, right? Now you can give user ID. Now anyways, for this you have to remember, right, the optional. Now inside, so in between if you add something, right, let's say I'm adding something called marks greater than question mark, then which means you have to edit everything, right? So this may not be the best option to actually make it dynamic, but yes, you have an option for to go to the optional parameters too instead of using name. But you can see how how feasible this will be, right? It will be very flexible. If you're using any intermediate, if you're inserting anything, let's say marks greater than, let's say colon, I'm taking m, then you can mention your parameter here. So let's say I'm actually trying to give something called m here with let's say 99 marks. So the user who have got 90, marks greater than 90, sorry, student who have got marks greater than 90 will be returned. Sorry. So yeah, so this is how we can create an optional dynamic query parameters and the named ones. So normally we normally prefer the named ones, so that if there is any any change in query, right, if there is anything been inserted in between or at first, if it is inserted at last, right, then optional parameters will not affect. But if you are inserting something at middle, then it's going to hit again. You have to change each and every thing again, right? So normally go for this. And again, if you take the nomenclature, right, don't go with these names like NI. Now always use something called PRM, which is parameter name, or this is marks, right, PRM, which is parameter, and just go for mark. You can have your own nomenclature if you want. Normally what we use is like PRM, like let's say user ID. Now this defines that you are actually using a Hibernate HQL, and when you say PRM, right, which means yes, this is a type of parameter you are actually requiring, right? If you take NI, these parameters, just wanted to, just for understanding, I just gave that, but never use them in that way. Always use a parameter nomenclature in certain way that people can understand that, okay, this is a parameter and this is a name of the mapping parameter we have, right? Now this is how you can create a dynamic. Now this can be applied for anything. If you want to set anything dynamic, you have to use your colon and the one which you want to make it as a parameter name, right? So this is how you should always use them as parameters, right? Now this is how we normally grow the query and make it so dynamic, and you can use these things. Now you can understand that you can write any query you want on the table using this, right? Anyways, so firstly, so initial classes, what we have seen is create, update, right? So many things like one-to-one many, we have done so many things. And if you feel that you want to use Hibernate only for fetching data and updating them and so on things, you can go ahead with this. Now these are few things which we normally use mostly to do updations, deletions and selections using Hibernate, right? Mostly because you have to write compound queries and all. Using this you can actually write them. Fine. Now this is your select query using a dynamic query. Now the same dynamic assignment will be same for all the things. Now let's look at update one here. Now update here is as same, I mean what we used to do. Now here your query HQL is same, update students. So how we have our SQLs, right? We have update so and so, table name and set so and so, and if you want to give any condition, you can give in where condition. Same thing here. Now you can see update students, which is my model class name, set the value which I want to change, and where condition. So what is the where condition? For which user ID you want to change the name, right? I have taken the same. I've just taken N, I, X and so on. So you can assign the same, and here as it is updating, right, you have to use an execute update. This is very important. Until unless you do this, right, until you do execute update, and the next one is commit. Until unless you do these two statements, right, so update will not happen. Anyways, fetching is a direct straightforward, right? So it will actually, whenever you write a create query and get the list, right? Now I haven't created a list here, but you can actually repeat the same thing. You can actually repeat the same program of list here also, right? Once you get the thing, now you are going to get something called list here, right, which you can actually iterate through. Now this may be either one record you want or multiple details you want, right? So in that way you can actually get that. Now this is update, same as update you have delete actually. So in delete again you can see that I'm using same session create query, delete from which entity class you want and what is the condition you want. Now this condition again you can make it dynamic using some colons again, but I just gave a direct value user ID or student user ID this, and once you are done with delete, this is something which you are actually using from manipulation DML, right? Then you have to go for execute update and the transaction dot commit. Now this is how we write normal straightforward queries if you want directly. Now let's see some aggregate functions we have. Now aggregate functions are something which we already know that in SQLs, right, there are so many functions like toDate, toChar, ctype, cdate, right? So all these functions are, no, again it all depends on which type of database you are using. If you are using Oracle database, few aggregate functions may work, and if you are using some other, few may not work. The same thing which are working in here may not work. Now here in our HQL, right, you also have few aggregate functions we can use, right? Now you can see here, now if you want to get sum of marks which you have, right, you can see you can get them in this way. Select, this is sum is an aggregate function, right? If you look into the documentation of Hibernate, right, you'll get all the, I'm talking about more on SQLs. Now this is a way how to actually execute an Hibernate SQL. A query which is using aggregate function in SQLs, right? So yeah, so this is how you can write. You can see select sum of marks from students. Now what it will do, it will actually get this details from students, right, and it will actually take up the marks. Now again here in your aggregate function, right, you have to use the same same parameter here. Now you want to get all the sum of marks, but you have to use the same from students so that it will actually fetch the details, right, internally. It will map the marks in multiple lists, it will sum up, and it will actually return the data. Now that is how you can actually get them. In the same way, you can have max of, it will give you the maximum, what is the max of the existing marks. It will give count of marks, average of marks, everything. You can actually go ahead and actually write any thing you want. But most of the times you will be using things like writing different queries. Now you can actually map these queries using those key SQLs, but here you have to make sure that whenever you are writing a query, right, so something, even if your colon is missing here, right, sometimes, now Hibernate will actually give you a very good output. It will actually show you which line, where exactly you got an error as such. Now that error is being generated by the Hibernate API actually, not by the Java, you know, what is that? A Java console error, right? It will actually take up and it will actually print the error so that you can actually go ahead and change. This is how you can actually work with queries. And normally, as you know, right, we don't hard code queries in this way, right? Yeah, you can write it. I'm not saying you can't write it. Sometimes what happens is if you write the queries in the same file, let's say you have 10 different classes, right? If you write these things in 10 different, I mean, each and every query in different classes, right? Then again, it will be a problem. So always try to maintain, I mean, one class or some classes only to write queries. Now, normally how do we do that is like, let's say I'm actually creating a column here, sorry, class in my common, let's say. Now, this is the best way to actually, let's say I'm calling it as queries, CLS queries. Now here, let's say I'm creating a method here like string. Now this is the best practice. Even if you're not using Hibernate, you can use this. So we normally call it as a DAL layer. Now this SQL query, I mean, this should be in DAL. Now DAL is nothing but a data access layer. This is MVC pattern which you use. You should always use that. Com dot, let's say I'm taking some tree dot DAL, which is data access layer. And in this data access layer, I can just drag and drop this so that I have my queries here, right? Now you can see com.c.dal and here you can write your query. Let's say I'm just writing string lstr query is equal to, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to, let me just close all this. I'm going to write this query part, or let me take this part, let me write so and so, control X and write it here. This is a query actually, what I want, right? And you can just say return of lstr query. Now this will actually return your query. Now you can just say here that get query for. Now you can write your name of this method as as per your requirement. Query for getting or retrieving all students. Just say something, right? And if you get any error, let's return some blank. Right now, this is where how we write. Now you can see here. Now if I'm using that, always make this as static because you don't need to create. I mean, it is just you are not doing any operations here. You're just getting a query here, right? So you can write this, and let's say you can just say CLS queries dot get your retrieve all student details. Now this will return here. Now let's say the same query you are actually using in like 20 different places, right? Now you don't have to change everywhere. You can just change at one place, and all other queries will get affected directly, right? Now this is how you can actually write up your queries if you want, right? Always try to maintain one repository. Now, or you can do one more thing, that let's say you want to write, so let's say you have some 20 tables in your database, right? Maybe you can write, if you are writing, I mean, for each table which you feel that this is a main table, you can create one class for each table, and you can write each query which you are actually want to perform on that table. Even if you have some combining tables, right, you can use the same, right? So that you don't have to change across the classes. Because why this is like, the maintenance part will be, you can maintain your product very easily, and normally, I mean, basically your client will be happy, as simple as that, right? If you normally go ahead with, try to maintain, as common as possible, right? Now this is how we normally write HQLs, right, in our Hibernate, right? So there is one more thing here that what is that? Yes, yes, execute part. Yeah, one more thing is that even the execution part, right? Now we know that we are every time, let's say you are actually trying to get something or return or update something in so many places, right? You can see here every time I'm actually no, this is not how we normally do, right? We open one transaction, we do a query and then close or commit this and close the thing, right? Now here what we are doing is we are trying to execute a query, right? So even this getting the session, executing that part, you can actually write in a separate class, which is in dial class. Let's say I'm creating something called new class called CLS, let's say execute. Now this is a main class where it will be executing. So let's say I'm creating a class here, and let's say this returns a list of some students. Now this is something which is execute students query, and let's say you're passing a string query, right? Now what it will do is, let's say here you are going to write everything. Now whatever we wrote here, right, we are going to write. Now this is something which we'll have to follow in real time, so never ever actually write each and every step there. Now here what we're going to do here is, let's say here lobs session dot close, right? So after begin session, let's say now here what we'll do, we'll actually try to get a query. Now let's say you have a query, so let me just copy this query here, this part, let's say, and let's say we are going to get this thing, which is my, I'm going to run this, right? You can see this, that, yeah, okay, this one, right? And let's say this is your query which you are going to send is this. Okay, now here let's say this is a static again, right? And you're going to call it as this, which is cls execute dot execute so and so and query. You can just call this. Now you can skip this. Now one thing what you have here is to give the parameters, right? Now here you can't hard code even the parameters here, right? Now this is not possible again. Now create query, you can just give this query here, this will take up the query. Now parameters you can actually give in some arguments. Let's say I'm trying to give some string arguments as args, right? Now this part is something which needs an array of arguments, right? Now here what I'll do, I'll just take this as the first thing is Kiran, let's say this, comma, let's say 101, let's say I'm going to give it in this, comma, let's say 99 is user, right? So this is how I can do. So here I can just remove this part, this. Right now this is saying that, what does it say, method execute type string. Why it is not taking string? That's fine. I'll just make it as a string array outside. And I can pass this params over here. Now you can see that I've actually reduced so much of code here. So with 2 lines what I'm going to get is, I'm going to get a direct list of students here. Let's say I'm going to take it as lobj details. It's as simple as that. So all the execution part will be in my execute query. Now here I'm going to run everything. Now here what I'm going to do, I'm going to map each and every arguments of 0, let's say, right? And here let's say arguments of 1. If you say that marks should be in integer, right, you can convert the have integer dot parse int of some strings. Now this is how normally we go ahead and create things. no, mostly. Just say you have 2 here, right? Now this is how we say, and once you are done with list, right? So we have to run the query, right? So you have something called list of students, let's say. LOBJ, let's say details is equal to, we have a query dot list. Now this list you can keep it as global here. Let's say it is none initially, and then you can get the data and finally return it up. Always follow some MVC pattern. Anyways, your Hibernate will not give you the pattern, but it's always better to see now here. So wherever you want this query to run, right now you can see there are 3 different parts which I have made. My query is in my CLS query and my execution part in execute. But here what I'm doing, I'm actually using both the classes. I'm using CLS execute to execute, and I'm actually passing the query using CLS queries, which means in either of them, if you want to change anything, let's say I'm using the same thing in 10 different spots. If I want to change any part, I can change directly in my these 2 classes and in these 2 methods itself, right? So this is how you should always write the query in generic. Now here I have made few things like I know student details and all as mapping, but yes, you can actually go ahead and give more meaningful thoughts for this. So this is one way how you can actually pass arguments. So other way is that normally what we use, normally, I mean, in general uses like, so these things, right, the param names, right, what you want to pass can be, you can actually reuse them. And these arguments, again, there is a problem here that if you are passing arguments in this way, right, and if anyone adds any other argument, if anyone wants any other argument in between, what we'll do? Again, you have to remember that, okay, the first one is param name, second one is this, so and so, right? Now again, this is something which is going to hit again, right? So instead of doing that, right, what we can do is you can actually pass an hash map here, right? Because you will have these parameters as 2 different different entities, right? So that's why you can actually pass an hash map where your key will be the parameter name and the value will be this. Now you can actually iterate through. Now let me just show you how you can use them. This is something which you can even use in your real time for other applications. Let's say I'm saying something called public static final. Let's say this is, I'll just say param name itself. Let's say this param name is equal to so and so. So this is param name. Now I'm giving the param name as same. Let's say this is a string param name. Let me just copy S3. Now this is your marks here. And this is your user ID here. Shit. So this is your user ID here. Now give user ID. And give marks the same. Just you can keep the same. And here you can just mention. Now let me show you this how you can actually use this, right? Now here let's say I'm going to use this for arguments as some hash map something, or you can use a linked hash map so that all the parameters will be inside. Now first one, let's say it is string, and second one, let's say it is object, because it can be a string or integer, anything, right? So let me make it as object here, and this is args. Let me call it as a hash map args, and I'll show you how you can map dynamically. Now here what we are going to do, we are going to map, let me just create a hash map here, sorry, linked hash map with a string. I want to use it for key, and this is something which is an object which is I'm going to use for value. Let's say I'm going to use it as hash map something is equal to new hash map. Now here I'm going to put hash map dot put off. Now I can take CLS execute dot, you can see I have params, user ID as, let's say I'm going to give this user ID which is Kiran. Same way let's say I'm going to use something called name is Kiran, right? Name is Kiran, and user ID is 101. So I'm going to give the direct integer here because this will accept a uh, object. Now marks I'm going to give, let's say this is 99. Now marks again, let's say it is integer. I'm going to give 99, and I can pass this with the, now this will accept. Now this is how you can map. Now see here how I can actually map things. Now here what I'm going to use, I am going to use only one set parameter here. Now let me just remove everything. First thing, let me use the iterator here, which is, so here I'm going to iterate through my hash map, something like hash map, right? So let me use for each here. So here I'm going to use a string as lstr key maybe, which is I'm going to use it for a hash map dot some key set. Now key set will give me a set of keys. Each key will come here. Now here. So what I'm going to map is I have a key. Now each key is nothing but each of my parameter, right? And the value will be the value of this parameter. Now you can see here I'm going to map object query dot set parameter of the first will be key and the value will be, let me take a string here as lstr value is equal to a hash map dot get of the key. Now this will give you a value and you can replace this value over here. Now this value, based on this, you can cast it to string and you can insert. Now you can see I'm actually doing everything dynamically. I'm not using anything. If you want to add one more, just add one more in your key here and continue with your yes and remove these params, right? Now this is how you can actually create your dynamic DB programming. Now you can do this even if you're not using Hibernate, you can go ahead. Now this is something which is a very optimized way to use all DB stuffs like queries, executions, everything in one layer. Because if you want to change, let's say tomorrow, I mean if you're changing any database, right, you just have to touch one layer called DAL layer, which is data access layer, right? So that is why never ever go for something like hard coding things in direct classes or any pages, right? Use it this way, right? So this is how you can actually write HQLs and more on aggregate functions and so many things in Hibernate actually, right?